Hello, friends. Sailor Mason Happy Home. Welcome. It's July 3rd, Thursday. No, Thursday, July 3rd, 2025. Independence Day. Hopefully, they'll pass that big, beautiful bill at some point. But that's not what I want to talk to you about. Today, I want to talk to you about this year. We here in the great state of Minnesota have suffered some tragic events, assassinations, actually. The first one was earlier this year when Brian Thompson, United Health CEO, was gunned down by a guy named Luigi Mangione, a nut job in New York City. And then we had the attempted assassination of Senator Hoffman and his wife Yvette. Luckily, they survived, but unfortunately, former House Speaker for the state of Minnesota, Melissa Hortman, and her husband Mark, and their dog, at some point had to be put down. They were gunned down and assassinated, and they died. The topic I want to discuss today is how these maniacs get to this point. Unmanaged anger, zero coping skills, no understanding or comprehension of how to let things go, how to work through emotional situations. But aside from their dramatic lack of mental health, I want to touch on Vance Bolter, because Vance Bolter is a native Minnesotan, and he's actually from a town right up the road from me. He's here in my county, and his house is just minutes from where I live. And everybody in the state of Minnesota is completely agog at what happened here, because Vance Bolter sat on a security committee for the state of Minnesota. He had been appointed to that committee by our former governor, Mark Dayton, and then reappointed again under Tim Walz. And he sat on a county board for counties Dakota and Scott. He was well known. He was well liked. He was a minister. He, blah, 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 blah. Baked apple pies and, volunteered to polish halos at the animal rescue. All these good accolades about this guy, and everybody's just in shock. Not just the grief and shock of the loss of the assassinations and having to lay to rest a beloved lawmaker of ours, but why this happened. And my theory is, I believe that Vance Bolter was radicalized. And I tend to think that a lot of these individuals are. People might associate radicalization with different religious groups, different political leanings, etc. We hear the term now radical left quite a bit with regard to Democrats who are leaning more toward communism than a free nation under our Constitution. So we're hearing that term a lot, and people throw around the word radicalization a lot. But if you think about radicalization in terms of Vance Bolter spent many years, many trips to nations in Africa. And the Congo was mentioned, and he made repeated visits there to preach the word of God to the individuals that lived there, to the different communities. And when you spend a lot of quality time in certain areas, being immersed in certain cultures, you tend to start almost falling into a Stockholm syndrome kind of mindset. you're there, so you're being polite, you're being amicable, you're probably, terrified for your life. So you're going to start agreeing, you're going to start listening to their side of things, and you're going to start to feel differently. And exposure is the door that gets opened to a journey to radicalization. And if you think about the Congo and these other crazy nations that he had been living among, they are generational civil war, military rule, martial law, genocide is routine. And as they grow up and they have their own babies, these babies are being raised in and existing in this violent, radical regime mentality, and they know nothing else. And I wonder if his time in the Africas, particularly the Congo, has the possibility of radicalizing him. And that's why he started to feel that he needed to start killing off Democrat politicians, because he felt that they had betrayed him, because he was a radical Christian, anti-abortion, anti-trans, anti-all these things that the Democratic Party identifies with. And so he probably, and of course, the Congo and stuff, I don't think that they tolerate a lot of things like transgender and, gay people and stuff like that. I mean, I don't know. The cultures there might frown on that, and so he might have picked some of that up. But the influence of being there could have started his path to radicalization. And his radicalization ended up focusing on and ultimately targeting Democratic politicians in our state here. Now, Luigi Mangione was radicalized in a more complex, different way. He was angry at insurance companies. Why? Who knows? Maybe he just needed an outlet for his anger, and instead of looking for healthy therapeutic methods to control that and to manage his anger, he decided to become radical and hate. And I can feel for this. I understand radicalization to a point, because I can get so emotional and ramped up about certain things and so angry about certain things. And I find myself getting intolerant. And so I step back and I check myself. But I've always had an issue with medical doctors. Now, I've never voiced that opinion online. I've never gone off and, made manifestos or anything like that. I just know that I get frustrated with my older relatives, even my beloved Douglas, when you go into a doctor's office. What that doctor says goes. Well, 99% of the time, yeah. But remember, they're working for you. You are paying them for a service. So they are only going to look at what's within that tiny little shoebox that they have in front of them. Oh, my elbow hurts. Okay, well, we're going to pump you full of painkillers. We're going to force you into prohibitively expensive physical therapy that's going to, take your time and everything else. And we're going to take a bunch of x-rays and, fill you full of radiation. We're going to do all this stuff. And their immediate goal is, and I've talked to doctors about this, their immediate goal is to alleviate whatever the symptom is that you have at this time. It's not to kind of examine and step back and go, well, let's look at your life as a holistic point of view. No, it's just, okay, well, you come in here, you're complaining of pain, so we're going to pump you full of painkillers. And all of the horrors and abuse that I have suffered at the hands of doctors my entire life, starting with my mother when she was actually pregnant with me, and the lab experiments that they performed on us and the horrible horrors that I've endured and my family has endured. Um, I don't I don't like doctors, but every doctor's human and every doctor's an individual. And one bad doctor doesn't mean they all are bad. But there was a time in my life where I couldn't stand any doctors. I wouldn't go to them. I refused for years. I would get angry and I would, tell people to be careful, don't listen to them, blah, blah, blah. I went through a phase like that. But it was just mouthing off and it was personal choice not to go to the doctors. But, I've grown out of it and I understand it. I have a better perspective now. But I can see where some minds can stay with that and run with that radical rage. And just like veterans and soldiers who go overseas to fight in wars, if they're there long term, especially if they're, undercover, they're doing some kind of secretive thing where they're having to immerse themselves in the communities, they're having to help the communities or become a member of the community as part of their, their military job. They can become radicalized and it can be confusing. You're there to kill those people, you're there to control those people, but yet they want you to become a part of them. And so people get radicalized. Men go into prison and they go in there without much religious background, or they might be Christian to start, but they always end up, not they always, but a lot of them end up becoming Muslim. Or they just turn radical religious, whatever their religious leaning is going to be, when they get into this desperate, terrifying situation of being in prison. And a lot of individuals continue to go back to prison because it becomes a culture, it becomes a way of life. They become radicalized to that. Street gangs, cartel, generations of people born into these lifestyles. They are born and raised in it. They don't know anything else. So their radical lifestyle, their radical behavior is something that happened to them. And I believe that in the case of Vance Bolter, that he more than likely became radicalized by spending so much time immersed in the cultures in parts of Africa where the conditions are horrific, where genocide is expected, where people are suppressed and oppressed and starved and treated horrifically and live under military rule. In fact, the president or imperial wizard or whatever he is, the head honcho over in the Congo, he was just in the White House a few weeks ago. And President Trump confronted him about the genocide and confronted him about the hate speech and confronted him about these things that he tried to just gloss over while he was in the Oval Office. And Trump caught him and called him on those things. So we know what kind of conditions, we have a very, very solid idea of what kind of conditions are occurring over there in day-to-day life in the Congo, which is one of the places that Bolter went. I think that he started out as a normal Minnesotan. I think that he started out loving people and being very devoted to his community. I believe he was devoted to his God and his family, and I believe that he probably was a basically good person. But then he started going somewhere that is counter to everything that America lives and breathes for, that America stands for, that America is defined by. And when he was immersed in those cultures, I think he began to see situations that made him angry. Because, of course, they're going to bash us. They're going to insult us because they don't want freedom for their people. They don't want their people to be empowered, independent, and free. They want people to be under their rule. And I think he was radicalized there. And he snapped. And when you take a weak mind and you radicalize it, they become very dangerous. Become very dangerous. And intellect, IQ, has nothing to do with having a strong or weak mind. Your mind comprises of many things. Your IQ, your emotional maturity, your intellectual capacity, your coping skills, your emotional mindset, your triggers, your habits. And I think that what we're seeing is we're seeing situations now where, because people are not being held accountable and we're not being strict enough, we're trying to be kind, soft on crime, letting people stomp all over the First Amendment by defining it in their own personal way. You know, that firebombing police cars is free speech, and you know, threatening to kill Jewish people is free speech, and they're not being stopped. They're not being held accountable. It's opening the doors for this radicalization by individuals who are of weak mind, who are emotionally corrupt or emotionally broken. And it doesn't take much for them to snap. They just have to have the right conditions. Mangione hated health insurance so much. He believed they were corrupt, that they were thieves, that they were stealing from the poor and from the American people. And, you know, yeah, I guess they are to some degree. But we can, you know, he can certainly blame Obama because that forced healthcare nonsense, when people can't afford groceries and can't afford to pay their mortgage, and they have to decide if they're going to get groceries and pay their mortgage or pay for health insurance with huge health insurance payments for their family that they use, you know, maybe 10% of it. So, yeah, we do know that the insurance companies and the whole insurance concept in our nation is corrupt and broken and needs to be redone. It needs to be overhauled. But that doesn't give anybody the right to run around and just randomly kill a CEO. Brian Thompson didn't make United Health. He didn't invent it. He didn't work for it with the intent of fleecing Minnesotans or Americans at large. He was a working guy just like the rest of us. He worked his way up the ladder. He had a wife. He had children. He was law-abiding. And who knows, if given the chance, maybe if he had seen the flaws from his perspective, from his position as a CEO at United Health, maybe he was seeing those flaws and maybe he was actively working to fix what's broken with our healthcare system. And if given the chance to live, maybe he would have fixed this very system that Mangione hated and gunned him down for. Nobody but Vance Bolter will ever know why he did what he did, or, you know, were they politicians of opportunity? I mean, one was a senator. They found nothing really consequential in his politics or his voting record to make any sense. Melissa Hortman was a former House Speaker. So why these people? Was it opportunity? Was it access? Was he using them as practice targets for a bigger plan, one will never know. Only Bolter will know that. But we need to step back and we need to very, very, very seriously look at our friends, our family members, our neighbors, our loved ones, and watch how they react, watch what they're obsessed with. And if you see any signs that they're becoming radicalized or that they're overreacting, they have some kind of fixation on something, politics or a particular politician or, the healthcare industry or the banking industry, if you see them becoming obsessed, enraged, angry, clutching their fists or whatever they're doing, maybe you want to talk them down off of that ledge. Maybe you want to open a line of communication or conversation with them. Assess the situation. Do they live alone? Do they have a history of mental illness? Do they own guns? Do they have access to weapons? Are they drug addicted? Do they have access to drugs? Is anybody watching out for them? So we can look for those signs of radicalization. It would be isolation, a lot of anger, stepping back from their lives as it is, maybe becoming very dysfunctional, possibly losing their jobs, starting to do a lot of writing or recording, hanging out with individuals or going to different places, group meetings and things of organizations that might not seem normal for them. Pretty much the anger and the voicing of that anger. Watch these individuals. And if you see any signs that these people might be becoming radicalized or becoming obsessed in an unhealthy or destructive way, find somebody to report it to. Go talk to your local police department. If you have a doctor or other family members or other neighbors or loved ones. But I think like drug addiction, alcoholism, other high-risk, dangerous lifestyles, we always have to look out for each other and we have to watch each other. And it's not enough to love somebody and to be compassionate and to listen to them. That's not enough. We have to look for the signs. We have to be diligent in understanding the signs and the signals that someone in our circle might be becoming radicalized, because this person could become very deadly. And radicalization, I believe, falls into the category of mental illness. So like your alcoholic uncle or, your drug addicted kid or whatever. That husband with the gambling addiction or whatever it is. You train yourself to look for the signs and the symbols. You train yourself to look for those habits and those behaviors that might indicate that they're sliding off of that cart. It's the same thing with radicalization. And it starts with anger, becoming quiet, becoming distant, isolation. Those are very, very big keys that something is going on. And if you have loved ones that are attending protests, that is a huge alarm bell. And if they are attending simply because they want to, be in the thick of things, they may not agree with what's going on, but they just want to be there so they can film it and say they were there. The more they go, the more sympathetic they may become to the rioters, and you could have a problem there too. So I think it's important that we take care of each other and that we look out for each other. But it's also extremely important that we understand that radicalization is very subtle and sinister. in how it slithers into the hearts and minds of individuals. And it can happen to anybody with any topic. Vance Bolter went after politicians. Why? Because he quite possibly was radicalized by being in nations where political bodies are despised, where governments are run by militant minds. And that's why there's so many gang violence issues and so many problems here in the state of Minnesota, because we have one of the highest concentrations of Somali immigrants in the nation. And they didn't come here to assimilate into America and become Americans. They came here because they knew that here they had a voice and they could practice this generational god awful violence and disgust that they lived with in Somalia. The violence, the military mentality, the threats, the genocide, all of the horrible things. They came here because they knew they had a voice and that nobody could stop them like they could in Somalia. So they didn't come here because they were politically persecuted. They didn't come here to assimilate and become an American. They came here because they knew that they could hate on our government because we have the First Amendment and they don't in Somalia. That's something to chew on. I know that sounds kind of radical, but it's my feelings. I think that's what's happening here. Ilhan Omar is a key example of that. Her methods are questionable. Her family links are questionable. Why did she come here if she hates America so much? Why was she given a position of authority? Because she lives in a city that is all Somali, so they're all going to vote for her. They're not going to vote for the American. They're going to vote for the Somalian, who is radical, who is absolutely outside her mind, who hates America. She's actually said as much. And she shouldn't be allowed to hold a political office in a country where she hates them. But because she has been allowed to have that voice that she didn't have in Somalia, she's getting away with it. She's radicalized because she can. And with that, I wish you all a happy 4th of July. May the 4th be with you. Happy Independence Day. Enjoy those barbecues. Enjoy your family time. Enjoy the sunshine. Enjoy the fireworks. Please stay safe. Don't do anything crazy and radical. And until next time, do good and be good.